We just got an email from Drew that she won't be making it.
Oh. Okay. Okay, very good. Well, let's go ahead and start. This is the Lake Forest Park Tree Board meeting on February 5th, 2005. And I maybe have a short reflection. You do sometimes.
I do sometimes. I didn't think of one today. Don't forgive me. Sorry.
You have to,
I'll do better.
well, I have to mind that.
I'll share one.
Oh, good.
As I often do, killing time at third place books, browsing the new tables, and ran across Street Trees of Seattle.
Oh, yeah.
That if folks haven't seen it, I am happy to loan it to anyone who wants to take a look at it. But it is a beautiful guide to walks that you can do around Seattle. Each neighborhood focuses on a specific tree. So the last one I read was Beacon Hill, that specifically talks about hollies and has a history of holly in Seattle, and then goes through a walkthrough of notable holly trees in the neighborhood, as well as other notable trees throughout the area that you can take a look at. So I found it interesting as a comparison to the work that tree walks that Dick's been working on updating, and something to potentially aspire to in how we think about our tree walks.
And his deep hatred of holly.
Yes.
As
Yeah.
invasive.
Yeah, and fascinating history of why there is so much of it here. There was like one person who decided it was her mission to try to make Seattle like the holly city of the US.
Wow.
Yeah, doing giant plantings in the, I want to say 1920s,
Really?
all over Seattle, with bringing out troops of scouts to plant holly for events. Yeah,
Wow.
so
Birds to direct.
yes, fascinating mix of history and local history, more broad histories, and then also talking about the different species of trees. So if anyone would like to borrow it, you're more than welcome to take a browse.
Assuming Lake Forest Park is not part of it. It's
Correct.
not part
It
of
is just
Seattle.
actual Seattle,
Yeah.
as far as I've found so far.
It's awesome though.
Yeah, it's cool find.
Yeah, good reflection. Thank you. Thank you. We have to be sure that Dick knows about that.
Absolutely.
I'm sure they got the idea from us, you know. There's another, what's it, Jacobson? Arthur Lee Jacobson, Trees of Seattle. I liked it because it's got, one of the reasons is it's got an appendix of all cemeteries in the area. And the
Oh.
great trees that you could find in those cemeteries are a great place for trees.
On topic, I just looked it up, the King County Library System has 30 copies of the book. So
Excellent.
there's ample copies if anyone wants to have their own for a brief period.
Well, thank you, Victoria. I don't think we need to do any introductions tonight. You're all clear about who we are. I guess I should say I'm chairing this meeting tonight, although I think that Doug Sprugel is still officially our chair through this month. But since I'll be chair, I'm vice chair, I'm chair. Next time. Qualified. Filling in tonight, so I know that Doug will not be here tonight. But I thought that Richard might be.
Will Mark Hopkins be joining?
Can we take a look at that agenda and take a motion to approve that agenda unless somebody has some other, well, actually, this is a special meeting and we're very limited on what amendments we can do to our agenda tonight.
Correct. Do we still need to officially approve it then? Since
Yes.
we're not allowed to make any changes.
We have
I
a quick,
move to approve that.
Go ahead.
so I just want a quick recap of the special meeting, what we can't do, we can't make decisions. Or,
So you're allowed to do everything that's on the agenda. You're not allowed to add any new stuff to the agenda.
okay, great, thank you.
Is that maybe the only restriction on special meetings?
Yeah, like in a normal meeting, if there was something came up, you could move to add it to the agenda to talk about it tonight. But for a special meeting, because it's not, it's just the state law,
Yeah.
that you're limited to only what is on the page.
Probably state law. Well, thank you. I heard Victoria move approval. Is there a second?
A second,
All in favor?
aye,
Any opposed? It's passed, approved. Here we go. Let's take a look next at the minutes from our last.
Jeff, Fred, a little more context?
Yes, sir.
The reason is usually a special meeting is like an emergency situation has come up.
Yeah,
And so like we're having a special meeting because this topic is urgent, we need to do it. But the law is that you can't just do other random stuff. This isn't really that kind of special meeting. This is we got snowed out, so let's make it up. But even so, anything that's not like the official first Wednesday of the month is considered an unusual meeting, which is why. So it's mainly for when you're having an emergency meeting, but it accounts for anything that's not really standard monthly standard.
yeah, so you can't, maybe you could sneak some agenda item in that you didn't want.
It's designed to maximize public transparency.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
okay,
Thank you for the context.
I looked at these minutes and I didn't think there was anything that needed comment or correction. Anybody else have any thoughts on? Somebody like to move to approve these minutes? Is there a air movement?
A second,
And a second. All in favor?
aye,
Aye. Any opposed? Thank you, and thank you, Elizabeth. Anybody hanging around to make a public comment, is there, that I not aware of on the screen? Okay, very good, we'll move on. Into reports and announcements. Oftentimes, Councilmember Goldman has something to share with us at this point. I don't know if that's true tonight.
Not a whole lot. I will mention that we have hired a new public works director, Rebecca Dickinson. She officially started, I believe, 27th.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the tree board is under the community development department, but we sometimes work with public works when it comes to like tree plantings and the like. So just letting you know that there's a new public works director.
Very good, thank you. And let's see, any news from climate policy?
I don't think we've met since the tree board met last. So I think climate policy was a week before the last tree board meeting and the next one is in 2 days. So,
what do you anticipate is gonna happen?
that's a great question. And if I had read the email that I got today already, I could tell you, but I haven't.
I didn't.
I don't know if you read.
I
the
did not,
update
yeah,
today.
I saw comments by Sarah. But that's all, and I didn't get a chance to read those yet.
Well, I didn't mean to leave you off of that reference the other day either. To
Don't worry, I know.
our climate.
I just didn't
policy
want you to
members.
think that I could make it.
Well, good. We have several items of old business we want to look at. First one on the agenda is the election of a chair and a vice chair for 2025. Did we officially elect me as chair, I think?
No.
It hasn't been done. It just feels like it's been,
We talked about
to
it.
me. We talked about it, yeah.
Does one of us need to formally nominate you or?
Yes, please do that. I think that would be the, or unless somebody else,
I would like to formally
No.
nominate you.
I would second that nomination.
okay. Is there any discussion? Any objections?
I think our assumption, Mark, is that you expressed interest and willingness to do it, so is that?
Well, there seems to be this handy pattern. If you're the vice chair for a year, then you can serve as chair and it kind of slides you into that. So, let's vote on that. Is there a nomination? We'd have a nomination and a second.
Is it,
Okay.
is it a motion? Is that what we need?
Motion for the vote.
Okay, well, let's go to a motion of a vote on that nomination.
I would like to move that we elect Mark as chair of the tree board for the 2025.
All in favor, please say aye.
I-
Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. Now the matter of vice chair. As I recall at our last meeting, there was some bit of discussion there. Maybe some people were gonna think about that.
I believe I nominated Stacy.
No.
We could go that route, couldn't we?
The only discussion was because I wasn't here,
Oh,
but
We played a little game of rock, paper, scissors, we
did, yeah.
Unless you would like to put your name in the hat, which you're more than welcome to, I'm happy to be vice chair for the next year.
That is good news.
Yeah,
thank you.
I would like to nominate Victoria Kusach. It's Kusach, right? Kutaz, sorry.
Because
Sorry, I don't.
That's
say it
actually probably closer to how you actually pronounce it, but no one speaks Polish in my family.
Wow.
So.
I feel very good about that.
Is there a
Other
second?
vice chair.
Second. I hear a second. Did I hear a second?
Second.
Second, okay, thank you very much. So. All in favor of Victoria serving as vice chair for the next year, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any? Thank you very much, Victoria, that's nice, thank you so much for doing
Yes.
that.
Yeah.
I think it's
I
awesome.
was thinking about giving you and Stacy a call sometime in the last couple of days, seeing what you were thinking. Really, you're way ahead of me.
Yeah. That's perfect.
Well, that's good. Let's see, next item on our old business agenda is the annual report and the final draft of our work plan. So these are items that I will be presenting to the council on the 27th of February. And I think we've worked these pretty well. Let's consider the work plan first, perhaps. Just because that's what I'm looking at. We've worked this pretty well, and so is there any questions, I guess, that you thought of about any of these items at this point?
It was really handy to have the red line version. Thanks, Elizabeth.
The only thing I'll call attention to, I'm guessing that Stacy, you probably didn't sit and watch our whole last meeting on the
No,
recording. The one thing kind of substance that we changed was we reorganized some things and for each section, put a couple, one or two items at the top in bold as kind of our priorities for the year, so.
yeah, awesome. I took a look and it looks really good. Yeah. Succinct, more succinct than past year.
I think I feel comfortable presenting this to the council, so. I guess we need to formally adopt this as our work plan. Unless there are any other questions or any other thoughts at this point,
I think we formally adopted it at the end of last meeting,
yeah.
pending proposed changes.
pending, okay,
So.
pending whatever. proposed
If,
changes.
do we need another?
You're, no, you're right.
It was just to show just the.
They may say that, don't they? Yep.
Plan all the changes. But it was approved last.
So it's approved. One thought I've been having, I guess, is that at some point, we're going to be doing a tree canopy study again. And that must be coming up pretty soon. And so it's gonna come up in our work plan at some point, not this year, probably maybe the year after that. Because there must be a role that the tree board has to play in preparing for that or setting it up, I would think. Along with the city arbors. So good, let's consider that our work plan, our marching orders for 2025.
I have a quick question. Just a quick question, if we've received any grants? Have we received a grant that Drew? was
Well,
gonna
yes.
pursue? Do you know?
For the tree canopy study?
No, I think it was a tree canopy study, yeah, I mean, and also it's in our work plan.
There was the one that Drew mentioned at the last meeting, the community.
Yeah.
forest.
Yes, that's
She
the
had,
one,
she had applied for it.
Yeah.
She felt good about it, but we had not.
we don't know if we got it,
But-
okay. That's
Oh,
all.
I thought we had received it. and
There
it's-
were two different ones that we've discussed at the last two meetings. There was one that was around the canopy study and that was there's somebody that is a specific system that they're doing like annual updates, and there's a bunch of reporting and a digital tracking. Is that the one you were thinking
Yeah,
of?
yes, because
That
that's the
one-
first one that she talked about.
That one, I believe, is the one that she said we had applied for, we were likely to get. The one she talked about, I think it was last meeting, was the one, a different one that we had applied for, gotten, but hadn't been approved for us to actually access. Correct?
The city-
And that was for an assessment of
Yes,
workforce management.
Yeah,
plan,
the city
basically.
council officially has to sign off on accepting a grant. It's just above a formality, but officially it's because it is gonna commit the city to work, and so this council just needs to sort of approve that, okay, there's this extra work that'll be done. Even if it's paid for by someone else.
As we're a private organization. So likely won't be affected by any budget cuts that are happening at the federal level. Thing. And the main purpose of that, I think, or that Drew thought it would be helpful for our work on a community forest management plan, which is on our work plan for this year to get going on that. So as I recall, that was main. Because that would at least be one good way to use some of those or all of those funds, which I think is now was 75,000.
When item B talks also about the 25, or sorry, the 24 annual report, so
Yep.
to make sure that.
Yep.
we Had a chance to discuss
I
that.
think we should turn to that now. Everybody had a chance to look at this, we did discuss, we discussed pieces of it, building up to putting it all together in a form like this. What, again, I feel comfortable, because I don't know what format the council might expect, but I don't see using any presentation slides for either of these. These items will be in the agenda packets with all the council members and the packets available to the public. So I plan on just talking these items. And I know that Doug was eager over the last few days. He asked for any other thoughts that people might have had to contribute them to him, and you can see they got incorporated. And I know Elizabeth did put a couple of items, update a couple of items over the weekend or probably on Friday. Hope she wasn't working on the weekend. Let's see. Any thoughts? Any comments or questions that need to be clarified or anything that got left off of this? Let's just take a look at it for the next. So the main items we got are the revisions to the tree inventory that mainly Doug was spotted at, I think, and saw that there was an error in the way that some numbers were being calculated. So the consultants took another look at that and adjusted. Apparently it didn't have major impact on the overall findings or outcome of the study. Then there were the changes to the general tree list, and I have not finding that I'm not sure where that stands. I think it's still in the hopper that we're working on it. I was going to talk to Drew about that tonight. She thought that where that was.
The tree list for the ordinance references.
Yes, that the ordinance references, I think significantly added to it and fleshed out several sections of that having to do with prohibited trees, or at least noting that some trees were on King County's not just tree list, not just weed list. And adding some additional information to accompany some of those trees to help people make decisions. And I know there's some other expansion that we did too, but I don't think we've finalized that yet at this point.
What I recall and what's listed here is the changes were approved by the tree board and ready for council consideration. I thought we had
So you remember,
I thought we had wrapped up the conversation.
that's what I wasn't quite sure about. Okay, well,
That may be right, Victoria, but I do remember that the tree list, because it was referenced in the ordinance, did not have to be approved by or didn't go through the same process as the tree ordinance.
I think that technically that might be right. But I feel like it's an important, I think it's a major enough, change to what the code is about.
Yeah.
Anyway, that it ought to be considered by the council, or this council should be aware of it. Yeah, if they're gonna be aware of it, they might as well approve it.
Does this group feel like you've seen the tree list and it's been like discussed and but in this group, I guess?
We spent
Yes,
maybe 3 meetings
Okay.
going over different iterations and feedback of revisions last summer, fall, something like that.
Yeah,
okay. Even that, but I know. So anyway, I may have a chat with Doug about that before the 27th as well, if that's possible. The recommendations then to revise the code itself. And that mainly has to do with the exceptional tree. Redefinition that we've been wanting to do. And I think this reads pretty clearly what's here. Now, I think this one is still in the works. That you're understanding too, and so we will need to finalize that at some point.
I think the last time we looked at it was meeting September 11th.
At the exceptional trees. I'm sorry, which date?
September 11th.
I think we might have looked at it. more
We just
recently.
got a presentation either last meeting or 2 meetings ago from Drew on it.
Yeah, I think,
And there were more questions about data that needed to be gathered.
Got it.
and it's, you know,
So tree code recommendations is still
Mhm.
still.
yes, it was still open to that discussion and, but we certainly worked through a lot of questions that we had working towards that. And, I guess the main question there too has to do with that, as council member Golden reminded us that we want to have good reasons for changes that we make to the code. From our city attorney. What do you think about that? Talk about that in terms of what the basis for our recommendations? Certainly that work that we did on the value of larger trees, some of us that poster we pulled together, the flyer we pulled together certainly speaks to. Seemed to be more than a proportional increase in the value, the stormwater retention. And the carbon sequestration that happens, so the extra diameter, extra size that we were talking about. I think that's probably the basis of a good reason for why we wanted to do this. It did seem to me that there was some sense that came out of the iTree report too. And having an inventory of the number of trees that was bearing on the reason why we might want to try to preserve more of those larger trees.
My recollection of where we left off was that with such a small sample size, our percentages were not significant. Or accurate enough to be significant for an argument, so she was gonna do, I believe, some looking into. Size and maturity and try to figure out if we had some better metrics on. Are we looking at? Trying to, why did we pick the numbers we did and what does it relate to other than bigger trees are better? But try to figure out. What is significant about 30 inches for the species we determined versus 42, et cetera.
Yeah, more justification.
Sounds like I should have another conversation with Drew before the 27th on that too, to see what.
I looked it up, it was the January 22nd meeting where Drew gave the PowerPoint presentation about diameters and percentages. And it's on video on the city website, so if you wanted to, you could watch that part of the video in sort of preparation for the next time that Drew's gonna present on it.
Thank you. And then there was a process we went through, so there were several meetings where we were looking at tree related input for the comp plan. Did a pretty good job of, I think. Will there be any, you who've been working on the climate section, the comprehensive plan? Will there be any additional need for tree board input from, on that, do you suppose, or?
I suspect as we get to the point that we're actually drafting things, there will be things that we'll bring back to see. If you see places that trees should be incorporated, I suspect there's a number of places where. Implicitly, tree related stuff is related to the climate pieces, but looking, we'll get to a point where we need to figure out, like, should we make some of that more explicit, and should any of it. My understanding, you may have a different one,
I don't.
is that there will be a specific climate element in the plan. And there will be pieces that still live in all of the other elements, so part of what we will need to determine is. How much gets pulled out of where it is and moved to the climate element, and how much gets left where it is and either referenced or is separate. So thinking through some of the, like, where would you look for it if you were looking for X? So where does it live most intuitively? So I suspect once we get to that point, we'll have things that we'll bring back to this group to see where you think it makes the most sense to live, and if there's things that we want to tweak to make more directly related to other new pieces that might be going in.
I can imagine some things on a very high level that probably would warrant input from the tree board, but just encourage a healthy community forest and
Yeah.
keep planting trees or all stuff like that.
Well, it seems like some of those things might be appropriate for the community forest management plan too.
Yeah,
Talking about tree evaluation, stormwater treatment, pollution,
absolutely.
CO2 or CO sequestration.
Right, and all of those things got mentioned in the original draft, the original version of that community forest management plan, but we probably have sharper ways of talking about that now.
Yeah, I would think so.
15 years later. So the report then goes on to talk about public outreach. All those things were under what stuff we accomplished. Advice to the mayor and city council. So under public outreach, we've got the different events. The Green Fair, the Secret Garden Tour, Picnic in the Park, Community Climate Action Fair. And the materials that were produced for those outreach events. And then we specifically talked about that, the materials update, yeah. Victoria and Stacy taking the lead on that. And we have two of our members were appointed during the last year to serve on the climate policy advisory team. Then tree planting and maintenance events, Arbor Day, the Ivy Out event that we did. And the tree planting, the 2 trees that were planted up by the Horizon View Reservoir. That's a pretty good list of stuff. It's have you missed anything or anything you feel like that ought to be emphasized more or? Okay, well, I'm getting out of that. I will have another conversation with Drew to be sure that I'm aware of the latest standing is on the exceptional tree regulation that we've been discussing. Good. Okay, well, thank you.
Yeah, thanks to Doug did the report.
Yeah, Doug pulled that together, input at the last meeting from us and yeah. Well, the community forest management plan is next on our agenda. And I was hoping we could, there might be some more news from Drew on the status of that grant funding, and if there was any way, how far we were from moving ahead on that, but has everybody had a chance to look at that document? Form any impression of it? Elizabeth was nice enough to print me a nice copy of it, and I bet she would do that for anybody else who wanted to do that. But,
And Drew specifically said in the email this evening that she'll have an update on the exceptional tree code updates and the grant at the next meeting.
okay.
So she's got info on both.
Well, I would urge you to take a look at that document. It is, you can get it on the website.
Yeah.
They're forming some impressions and opinions about where things no longer applicable, or where things can be stated better than they are there, or new categories of information that gotta be there. That is essentially a policy document. And I do think it's important because it gets mentioned in several places. It certainly gets referenced several times in the comprehensive plan for the city, and it gets mentioned other places, other times. So I think it'd be good for us to see that it's up to date. It's really a living document that we have some faith in. And not that I don't have faith in what's there, but it's just, we've had it 15 years, I think, since it was written. And it does seem to me that it was, as I recall, as I was on the committee at the time that produced it, it was as much a report. It tried to serve two purposes. It was a report on what that committee had been about for the last year and a half, as well as trying to state planning guidelines, policy type guidelines for the city. So I think one thing that comes to my mind is that it no longer needs to be a report. There are portions of it that definitely strike you that way, that here's who was on the committee and how often they met, that kind of thing. There's stuff in there that is reminiscent of a report, a committee report that certainly can fall out or be recast if there's something else needed. But, so I guess that's where we are. I think maybe we ought to think about having it on our agenda for the next meeting. And maybe if we could all have a chance to look at it beforehand, we can start talking about the things that strike us as where there's opportunity to improve it, or where there's missing information that we ought to develop for it.
This is the March 2010.
March 5th, I think.
March 11th.
Oh, it's a different copy.
Oh, it is.
What, I think it's the 5th, isn't it?
It says the 11th on the one she has, and that's the same.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were referring to the next, our next
It's
tree
the
board
tree
meeting.
Got it,
I
got it,
know
got
it's
it,
March
got it.
5th. Well, so what is the date on that?
March 11th, 2010.
Yeah.
Yeah, a long time ago.
Yeah.
Although it seems not that long ago.
A lot has happened.
Yeah,
Indeed.
yeah.
I like that, though, putting it on the agenda, it's a little more solid action.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
You were the chair during that time.
No, I was actually demoted to member. I was.
It was unanimous.
You were the chair of the Urban Forest Task Force.
Yeah,
Yes.
sorry.
And then that
First phase.
phase one, then yes, phase two.
Phase one, and then we came up with a very interesting way of measuring trees. It was called tree mass. It's based on the literature, and we had a great arborist, consulting arborist working with us, and we, it was a little unwieldy. It was a little unwieldy to ask people to figure out the mass of the trees in their backyard, even though we gave them a simple little formula to do that.
There was a lot of hugging involved.
How far can you reach? How many in your family does it take to?
Just point out another name looks familiar from the 2010 task force membership list.
Yeah, I was pretty,
Richard was-
I was pretty green. I don't know how much I
There
contributed
you
to that.
It's great.
That's awesome.
It's
So you-
learned.
We'll just be reading this and just take kind of general notes on what seems like it could be improved.
Yes.
Okay,
Now that, so initial conversation, we just do something like that. With the high points, of where do we see the obvious places where this can be improved?
yeah,
And it might be that the outline is not, doesn't hold anymore, we kind of need a new outline for that, so. I think if we can have an open initial conversation on it to see where we are, what we're thinking, and maybe some information will develop on. Systems that might be available for us to do that work.
Debating if I want a physical copy, how many pages are we talking?
How many pages? 60
it's
pages.
quite large, yeah.
Yeah.
58, yeah. I downloaded it, so,
There's a lot of pictures.
yeah,
And the committee produced that report. We didn't have any consultant. But at least it was doing that kind of graphic and document production for us. So I guess I tend to think, well, gosh, a group like this, as talented as this is, we could write it, produce it. That is a
definitely.
big job. So if there's help available, that would be wonderful.
We could definitely revise it. Starting from scratch to
You could-
generate something
yeah.
like this is the hardest thing.
Well, I think that'd probably be the first way to look at it, does this outline still hold and,
Yeah.
well, we just update it, and here's a part that's obviously referring to that old committee specifically, and that we don't need that anymore.
Yeah,
So that certainly be a way to approach it. Maybe if we have some more looking at it, we can make some of those kind of decisions, at least initially get a sense for.
are there any neighboring communities that have similar plans that we might look at for comparison?
That's a good thought. That's a good thought. I'm sure there are.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
One I know of, I don't know how well it ranks, but Cambridge Island has done they
yeah,
spent a lot of time thinking about trees and green forests.
yeah. Drew often comments about Bainbridge, because she was
I think she came
She
here.
was-
she came from
Oh, okay.
Bainbridge, yeah,
Okay,
Yeah.
so she probably has a lot of good.
For some reason Lacey was really an edge city at the time that we were working. If I recall, we all looked at what they were doing in Lacey and read some of their documents.
But for what it's worth, Shoreline has an urban forest strategic plan.
Yes, okay,
perfect.
that would be very good to have a look at, wouldn't it?
And theirs is only 26 pages.
Sounds better and better, doesn't it?
Save space.
She's meeting with someone at Shoreline soon.
Yeah.
Nice.
That's.
All right, well, any other thoughts on community forest management plan as an agenda topic tonight?
I guess, so how does that, so Drew will do her presentation next time, and then we'll have a discussion about the current plan.
Yeah. Yeah, I will coordinate with Drew. Before that meeting. Okay, very good. Well, the other item of business and old business there is the 5 Acre Woods, and I don't know if we have any other information on that at this point. Dick was working on that with I think folks from the Stewardship Foundation. Polly, especially maybe Polly has told you something about it.
I know they met. I don't think there's been a meeting since, before the last meeting when Dick talked about, the fact that there was a particular area that they were thinking of removing the invasive trees and replanting. So I think that's where things are. They're working on a plan involving the city and the Stewardship Foundation. Coordinating this.
Yeah, yeah. And as I remember Dick talking about it, his impression was that it was more than a group of volunteers that work on Ivy. I don't know how, because he was talking about removing some holly trees, for example. That might be a bigger task than.
Right.
Than a volunteer might take on if they're, to bring in some tree cutting expertise or whatever.
Yeah, so might have to ask for funding, maybe from the stewardship or from somebody.
Depending on the nature of the problem, I guess that needs to be addressed there, but certainly depending on the size of a tree. Guess we don't get any dispensation either, do we, in terms of tree permits?
Probably not.
And holly is a tree that's required to have a permit, although it's not allowed for replanting. But so there's a lot of stuff to work out. And anyway, it's middle of February and it's 30 degrees out. We're not gonna do it right now, so.
Sorry, can I update about the community forest plan?
Yeah,
So in 2021, King County created their 30-year plan. And in the appendix for it, they list every King County city that has a forest management plan. So that seems, some will be more or less relevant, but that seems to be a good start on this stuff. I can email you that, Elizabeth, and then you can distribute it.
you can do that. And
Super helpful.
maybe within the next week or so might be good. We can get that out rather than in the agenda packet or something. What's the document called though again, Larry? It's King County's.
It's the King County 30-year forest plan, which they did 2021.
Wow.
And appendix 2 lists roughly 20 King County cities that have some level of forest plan.
And I guess King County itself might be a.
I'm presuming you didn't know that off the top of your head. I'm very impressed by your Google skills. Finding that so quickly.
Totally.
Thank you. So I don't know if there's anything else we can do on 5 Acre Woods at this point. It's kind of like to be talking about hypotheticals and what if, and we just need to find out. I suppose there'll be a work party up there. There always is a work party every Saturday morning. You know, ivy and stuff, and
What's the focus here? Removing, sorry, I wasn't here for the conversation. That conversation around the 5 Acre Woods.
Dick has a specific
Oh.
area that
Ah.
he's interested in looking at partnering with stewardship on getting a bunch of stuff removed and redoing.
It's
taking
more
out
than just
invasives.
what a work party can do. It's, yeah,
it sounded like it, but
Yeah.
we should check that out.
Okay.
Because those folks,
People
they're
figure
not
out
averse
better.
to removing holly from the trees.
I think there were, do you remember the type of tree that he referenced that?
I wanna say it was black locust, but I don't know
Locust.
where that came from
Locust,
in my
oh.
brain.
I think that's right. I think that's right. Those were the trees that there was a particular tree that he was.
I thought it was holly, but maybe it was black locust.
Maybe it was both, but he definitely listed the black locust. So those may be a bigger tree,
That would be more substantial, yeah.
because you're right, the group has been removing the holly.
ivy.
And the holly.
I was thinking, I did miss the last work party. But I would probably be at the next one, so. I might get a chance to take a look at the area also with Holly, see what she's thinking. Okay, let's move on. We may. The next item on the agenda is Arbor Day. Arbor Day. That is, so there's been where you smile.
No, just,
There's been a plan kind of emerging or evolving as some individual conversations. April 27th is a Sunday. And it's Friday is Arbor Day, the 25th. Well, we had talked about here before that in this group, we talked about having something at Horizon View that involved Dick talking about trees. Like a tree walk of Horizon View. And that idea kind of caught on with a bunch of people when I mentioned it, the climate action committee people had talking about wanting to do something for Arbor Day with the tree board. And that's why I mentioned this idea that we've been planning this tree walks at Horizon View Park, and Richard cannot do it on the Saturday. So we started talking about Sunday. Why couldn't we do it on a Sunday? So that's kind of where it is, and the Climate Action Committee is interested in joining us and maybe helping publicize it. When they're okay with the 28th, the
27th,
the 27th, yes, that's right. And also, it got mentioned at the last meeting of the Secret Garden Tour. Secret Garden Tour people have an art project in mind. You know, you know what they do, everybody knows it. So they raise money for art in the city, and that they have a project in mind that they want to commission, or maybe it has been commissioned. But they would like to use that time also to show some representation of what that art piece is going to be for Horizon View Park. So they would be joining us there too. So I ran that by Dick, and he thought that was a great idea. So that's kind of the plan that's evolved on that. It's for April the 27th. At probably 1 o'clock. 1 o'clock, and first half hour might be the Secret Garden Tour people, and then the next half hour would be a walk talking about trees with kids. The Horizon View Park.
Awesome.
What could be better?
It's perfect. Is this one of the ones where maybe we could take notes or record it or something so that people could repeat it in the future? Remember Dick was talking about doing is accessible.
Is this one of the tree walks that he's
Exactly.
already done?
That's my question.
Or is he developing a fifth tree walk?
Yeah.
You know, I don't
Do you
know.
know?
Crossed my mind to check that. I don't know. Councilmember Goldwyn, you to find the tree walks in Lake Forest Park. That's Lake Forest Park website, right?
I thought the tree walk was a Star Wars character.
Well,
Yes.
I think Dick thought that they needed to be updated, and he was gonna update.
He's partway
He's
through.
working on that.
Yeah,
Mark was giving you crap last meeting for not finishing.
yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, because he's been talking about it literally ever since I joined the board, which was,
I think he's got 2 new ones updated on there.
oh, that's great.
Is that correct?
Blue Heron and Horizon View walks are they're listed as updated.
Okay, so that is one of the
That's great.
4.
And then City Hall and Animal Acres are not.
It's a good idea. That accomplishes 2 things.
Okay, so that's good. We'll see what he's able to do or what he wants to try to do by that time. Maybe we'll all have our iPhones in our hands as we walk around or something. But anyway, that's the plan for that. We'll have opportunity to check signals on that at our next meeting, and in fact, our next 2 meetings before that happens, but
Yes. I just clicked on one of them, so it's very detailed with walking directions and pictures. But I think what would be helpful is a map. That kind of says like here's the city and like this is where you'll be walking, so you have a feel for it.
well, the original ones had a map, didn't they? I know they did, because I know the woman.
Yeah, Tree Walk 1 has a map. Tree Walk 2, I didn't see.
I saw the maps in this book, look really neat,
Yeah.
kind of neat drawings.
Yeah, it's part of what I like about the book. It's just
Yeah,
really pretty.
Yeah,
Little lines and
Tree
then,
Walk
yeah.
2 does not.
Yeah, I think maps would be good.
is there an illustrator around there? I wonder if we could get the illustrator to.
I think the author did all of her own illustrations. Yeah.
Well, do any of you know, there's a woman, Karen True. She was one of the original people we were working on a Third Place Commons. She's some level of cartographer. She did the original maps that went into the book. There were 4 maps that were in the printed version of those tree walks, and she did those original maps. don't know, I mentioned Dick has a plan for that. I think I do agree that a map is really a good piece to have with each of those blocks to follow along.
Yeah, the original ones have a little map, so just copy that into the updated version.
Yeah. Okay, is that enough on Arbor Day?
Sounds like plans coming together, sounds like you're gonna be kind of the point person to connect the dots with the different groups, at least for now.
Yeah, I think so.
Awesome.
We can revisit that at our next meeting. See how it's coming.
As always, as we get closer, if there are things like educational materials or activities that you want help
Yeah,
planning or developing.
there are
let us know.
tasks you wanna put out there for people to take on.
Yeah. I don't see any for now, and I'll give that some thought to bring to the next meeting, you know, if there's anything like that. Well, let's just go on. There was a point related to that, Victoria, that I think we should touch on before we close the meeting. So the point B, I probably should have caught this earlier. I saw it was an error. I was gonna correct it. Windemere presentation on February 27th. That has not been scheduled. We know we discussed it, whatever we said for the 27th, something else, I think. But yeah, so I was invited to come and talk to the Windemere staff about trees in Lake Forest Park, and in my mind, yeah, I know, yeah.
That's amazing.
There was a group of us who were interested in housing. And we were talking with the head realtor. Head agent over there, because she's interested in housing too, not just in the sales of housing. I mean, she's interested in affordable and different kinds of housing as well. We were talking to her about how she could help watch for particular properties that owners might want to sell and might be interested in doing something creative with or whatever. Anyway, out of that conversation, she said she gave up trees and she invited someone to come and talk to her staff, which is, I guess, all the realtors there, but they're one of their monthly meetings about trees. So in my mind, that boiled down to maybe a summary of our tree code. We've had that discussion in this group, but in several groups that I've been a part of over the years about shouldn't the realtors who do business in Lake Forest Park be educated about trees and how the community feels about trees? That might be a big help for them to talk to their buyers about. So this seemed like it's kind of along that line, consistent with our goal of reaching out to the community about trees. But so in my mind, I was seeing maybe just a one-page piece that would just be a summary. I was going to do it, and then I hadn't heard from Drew. I asked Drew if there was one already existing. It may well be. It may be hanging on a board, by the planning desk. I should take a look there, I guess. But anyway, so I was checking with Drew to see what she already has, and rather than have to sit down and go through that. But that's where kind of I was going with that idea. There may be some better way to do that, or some other ideas some people might have about
So this is
what's the message we would want to take to realtors.
Yeah, so so that's what I was gonna ask was, so this is to present to the realtor so that they can better inform potential residents when they're buying a home.
Yeah, I think ideally that it would work that way. They would at least, if they get, there's something they're showing somebody a property, the person says this will be great, I'll remove these 3 trees back here, etc. Then they're gonna say, well, here's the process you would have to go through to do that. Community values its trees, and if they were knowledgeable about the code, they could talk to potential buyers about tree removals or properties.
And point them to city resources, but
Yeah, that's right. Good, other kind of references.
so I can see how that. It could be a tricky situation for a real estate agent, someone says, oh, yeah, I'd love to take your scenario, I'd love to, clear this out, so I can have that nice lawn here. But this agent gonna say, oh, no, you can't do that, or you know, they're gonna be a little conflicted. They wanna,
That's right, that's right. They hate to lose a nice sale for. Because they were honest about the tree code.
yeah,
And it's not just a matter of going out, and removing it. But you know what, I do think it's a sound idea that.
yeah, no, I'm not saying it's not.
Real estate agents could, you know, be able to express something about the way tree removal works in Lake Forest Park with people, potential buyers. And it's an idea that's come up for years and
Mhm.
many groups have been a part of it. We talk about, you know, what steps we can take. Well, what about real estate agents?
Seems like a key part of that is communicating the value of trees in the first place and why the. You know, there's first, there's kind of a historic, you know, Lake Forest Park value, but then there's actually, you know, health. Monetary values, you know, property values, health, mental health. I think there's a lot of, I know, and I know we don't have all that information yet.
Well, we need a lot of information, you give benefits of trees,
Sure.
sure.
And a bunch of that is in the watershed report from this past year,
Mhm.
specifically for Lake Forest. Park.
Which,
The, what's the actual name of the report? The,
The eye tree report,
yeah,
the inventory.
the Urban Forest Ecosystem Services and Values Report. Okay, I feel less bad that I didn't remember that. I am from DCG Watershed, is that what they're called?
Colloquially, that was the inventory.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So it's got some benefit statistics from iTree,
I'll go look at that.
the city. The brochure that was developed this past year also has some of that and touches on at a high level, some of the like, what are the benefits? And by the way, we have a tree code that you have to adhere to. So having some copies of that to bring to them may be a helpful resource for them as well.
That may be the way to go, with just print the whole code out and take it. I was thinking if there. Do a one-page summary that. Would be a summary for sure, but
Yeah.
but would.
I meant copies of the brochure that
Of the
we
brochure,
developed
okay.
this past year.
Yeah.
A one pager on code, just over tree code overview would be nice for potentially some of our tabling events as well. I know we try to not be the table about the tree code, but I would say at least half the questions that I've gotten at recent events have been about the tree code and about enforcement of it or policies around it. So having a cheat sheet that we can point people to.
Well, that's helpful,
Would be
guys. It's helpful to think that point it probably would be worth a short course in. Tree benefits, and that is, I must say, one of the places where that original community forest management plan sells. There's like literally 2 pages of bullet point benefits of trees, you know, it's. You know,
Even just pointing the Windemere folks to iTree and showing them what it is as a resource, cause
Sure.
that could help them. When they're trying to sell any property, to
Yeah.
be able to easily pull up and, you know, give people
Oh.
some. Stats about the benefits of the
that tree in the back
trees
over
on,
there. This one
exactly.
in front is, yeah. Okay, well, now you're making this for me into a fairly major project.
But there's a lot of-
Brainstorming what you should do.
No, this is
Like-
good, this is good, that's it. I don't imagine I'll have more than 20 minutes, which is fine.
Thinking about Windemere, would it be helpful to ask them what they think the best way to communicate to new residents about the trees are? You know, like, do they think it would be helpful for realtors to be communicating this versus a little welcome packet that the city sends out versus something else?
We've talked a lot about sending out some kind of postcard for new property owners.
Yeah, that gets messy right away, but I mean, it's hard.
I feel like it's come up every few months,
I know.
of like, should
I
we
know.
do something?
So like when the deal is done and is recorded, you access that information and you send a new tree owner, a new homeowner information about trees in Lake Forest Park.
I think that's the city's responsibility, not maybe the real estate events.
Correct. We've talked about, is it something the city should be doing that we can help develop?
Yeah.
and make happen? But finding out from the folks who are working with them through that process, what a good delivery mechanism would
Or
be.
if they have thoughts on when in the process is going to be the most helpful, is it when someone is looking around and they're looking at a bunch of different cities? Or is it once they're, they've chosen a house and they're entering the escrow process, or is it once they've actually moved in and so just kind of. Maybe getting the realtor's take on, like, where in the process is good to engage with the future owner.
Yeah, and ideally you'd want to catch somebody before they invested in a heavily wooded property. Obviously, thinking that they were gonna remake it into swimming pools, tennis courts or something. Easily.
Could be pickleball.
It's totally good pickleball, for sure. I know someone who they're in Fall City, but
But it,
they just put in a pickleball right in front of their house.
well, good, we can, I don't know when that hasn't been scheduled yet, and so it's not coming up anytime soon, but it would probably be good to do it before it gets lost. Fall off. I suppose what it would be good for me to do would be to contact that person again and reaffirm her interest in having somebody do that. And, if somebody would like to go with me and be part of that, I volunteered myself to do it, but, having a couple people show up would be bad.
How do you do that with you?
Do that, that'd be great, great.
And be part of the helping put some of that stuff together. Or pull it together.
Refresh my memory. It was one of those brochures that you produced. Or was it, there's a lot of
Yeah.
information that one of our previous members produced, that some of which was getting at that too, but.
The one that I put together this past year has some of the stats from the watershed report, the iTree report. Some little blurbs of, by the way, we have the tree code that you'll have to adhere to, and this is why it's important.
Yeah.
And scan here for more information. It also has, info about the tree board on it. So it's all pretty high level. I mean, it's
Yeah.
one page, but with a lot of pictures.
I mean, maybe I'll come down to City Hall and sure I have a copy of that, I think.
I know there's a bunch of copies still in the outreach box.
Yeah. Okay. Well, good. Thank you for input on that. Thoughts on that. I guess that's our agenda, folks.
Planning next week.
So I've got, let's see, what I'm keeping notes on what I think will be on our next meeting, which is on March the 5th. And I've got exceptional trees. I've got a plan for the green, not necessarily in this order, plan for the Green Fair on March 29th. Well, let's before we move on too quickly without just what we're talking about March 29th on, even though it's on our next agenda item. Folks who would be willing to work at that day, the 29th, is probably 10 to 2 share shifts or some of that time.
I'll be out of town, I'm so sorry. March 29th. Looks like a Saturday.
I am also.
Okay, you guys are traveling and
Sorry.
I'll talk to I imagine Doug will be not ready to do that. I'll talk to think about that. But thank you, Victoria, good. So.
They have it in my calendar, so I
As long
won't
as
be
you
out of
have
town.
it in your calendar.
It's official now.
Yeah, right, thank you. So, and as long as it is in your calendar, you're thinking about it, you could also be thinking about some of how we could make it more interesting.
I'll think about if I can come up with any activities. This is. I wasn't at this one last year.
This is the Green Fair?
Yes.
Yeah, it's great. I love it. I'm sad I'm gonna be out of town.
Is
I got a
it-
lot of great goodies from last year.
What kind of demographics vibe are we? Mostly adults, are there many families, kids?
Yes. To both.
There'll be both, but I think there'll be fewer kids than there were at the picnic in the park
Yeah.
and some other
Yeah.
things like that,
Okay,
yeah.
Remember I brought invasives last time to show people what they look like?
Yeah, what did you mean?
I brought holly and ivy.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
I just ripped it out of the ground and brought it over.
So it was fresh.
It was.
love it.
That's right.
We kind of showed, talked through that. We brought a bunch of books. Dick brought some books. Northwest Trees. I don't know if you guys have seen that book. He brought a couple others.
One
And
interesting thing to do that I like, when I've done it a couple of times, is to have a question on a flip chart.
yeah,
And they'll just do some polling and it lead to conversations, but you also kind of get a sense of what people might think about an issue or two.
yeah,
It's a fun thing to do is, two truths and a lie. So you put up, you put up two things that are facts and one that's not.
That's
And
a
then-
great
and they have to
idea.
try and pick.
people come up and
People
talk
get really competitive.
immediately,
Yeah.
yeah, for sure.
About trees, yeah.
Yeah, or ask, do you know the biggest tree on your property? What is it? How big is it?
Okay, that's good. Victoria and I'll be thinking about this.
Need a line.
Okay, good. So what did I say? Exceptional trees, we will finish our planning for that green fair, which is on March 29th. We will take up the community forest management plan with a little more
Bigger.
pause on that topic for a little longer to talk about it and start getting some impressions about what the form, what would be involved in making it a great document. And well, I think 5 Acre Woods will probably deserve to be on our menu, on our agenda again to talk about. As well as Arbor Day. Now, as you think about it, what else should be, anything else should be on our agenda then?
We talk about, I'm sorry, I kind of blanked out there for a second.
I was going for it.
Did you talk about the community forest management plan?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, that would be on the agenda.
The tree list? Did you wanna bring that up?
Yeah, we better.
Sorry.
That.
I know everyone would rather forget
Well,
about
it's
it.
exceptional trees. Well, let's put it on there for now. Maybe I'll talk to Drew about it and see what the status is for.
We can always scratch it, but might as well not have to put it on there and with no prep.
Okay,
That's robust. It's definitely 2 hours of discussion next. Agenda.
well, folks, I think that's all we have to talk about, or all the law allows us to talk about. Probably other things we could chat about.
I have a quick question for the group once we're done.
Okay.
Like done with the tree board or done?
Done with the agenda tonight.
Okay, we are done. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Yes, there is. Is there a second?
Second.
I have a second. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? No, thank you. Meeting is over.
I was just wondering if people had, so thank you, Victoria, for mentioning that book.